All right. Thank you for being here. Mandy Theis, artist, teacher, I would say content creator because of the YouTube videos and things, and your Instagram. There's content out there that's being created.
Well, thank you
What
for
do you
having me.
think? Yeah, thanks for being here. What do you think drives the human's desire to paint?
Ooh, I think that we all have this desire to recreate the beauty that we see in the world in a way that we can have, right? We're trying to capture that. And we see things around us every day. We have ideas. And, sometimes we capture those ideas in music, sometimes we capture those ideas in art. And, I think that it's a human need to preserve and capture these feelings, these ideas, these moments of beauty in our world.
Nice. I often think, what did the cave person think if they were the first ones that were painting on walls? If that's
I
how humanity unfolded, like what their
sure.
drive was.
Yeah, well, I'm really impressed actually by the quality of the artwork in many of like the Lascaux caves or some of the other areas that we found prehistoric artwork. Um, you know, eh, you know, i- it's this just fundamental desire to create, I think, and also, those moments of what do I do with myself or maybe boredom, like if you're hanging out inside your cave and you're like, what should I do? Maybe, try to draw that bison or, whatever you're thinking that, that cow, whatever you're hoping for. It's, a way to put your hopes and dreams out there into the world.
I think it's that, yeah, the connection with creativity, I think, is
Mhm.
that draw to it. What do you think? Go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say also, I think that there's been a lot of talk about being in a flow state, especially in the last 10 years or things like that. The idea of, being so fully immersed or engaged in something that you're not actually thinking about anything. And I guarantee go into a flow state painting, right? It's going to happen. And so if that's a desire that you have or whatever that flow state does for the human psyche, creating the arts that will get you in that place.
How do you find you can get into that easier? Is that when you're painting, are you trying to get to that, or does
Um,
it just happen before you know it?
I actually think that there's phases to get to that point. When I was training, in order to paint at this level, I'm a classically trained painter. I had to train for many years in what's called an atelier to learn these skills. And when you're learning the skills, it's really aggravating and frustrating. And it's like a start, stop process where you get it a little bit and then you get interrupted by your inability to understand a concept or, you made a mistake or things like that. But once you hit a certain level in your art, whatever your art is, music, dance, painting, whatever your art is, you have enough systems in place to get to the end result pretty consistently. And to me, that level of mastery is what allows for the flow state.
Do you think that the origin of that zone or flow state is the same for every type of art, or do you think each type of art has its own little segment of that?
Oh,
I don't know if you
that's a
call that the muse or not.
Sure. I mean, that's what some people would say it is. I'm only highly trained in one art, so I dare not speak for the other arts, but I do know from speaking with musicians, for example, that are at the top of their field, like the New York Philharmonic musicians, that it's similar, right? You practice your craft, you engage in your craft, and you execute your craft. And once you hit a certain level, that execution comes in more and more of a flow state, the more that your skills are in line with what your vision and intention is as an artist.
Do you think that flow state is a focus through just your mind, or some sort of channeling of some other creativity from another source?
The mind is this magical, mysterious thing to me. And, the way that we put some information together or the way that, our subconscious works, it's really beyond me. But, I can find that I am painting in a flow state and I can be thinking about many different things all at once. But at the end of the flow state, I'm not really thinking about anything specific that I was thinking. It was just like 5 hours went by, boom, they're gone. I have a painting now, but even though I remember thinking throughout the process, I wouldn't be able to tell you exactly what it was. So I think there is some sort of connection to your subconscious, to your fine motor skill development and your muscle memory. When you master a skill at a certain level, it's just as much about your muscle memory as it is about what you're thinking or seeing or doing. So I think that it's probably a combination of all those things, although I do not claim to be a brain scientist.
Hmm. Yeah, I think you still have those little occurrences where you think about it, or just if you're going with the senses, your basic senses, there are other senses that they don't. If you look up what are the human senses, you get touch, taste, smell, sight, hearing pretty easily, but they leave out things like acceleration, passage of time,
Sure.
internal type kinesthetics, and proprioception. That I think you could probably squeeze those into those main categories, and maybe you could put taste and smell in the same category. But
Mhm.
it's, I think you have those little occurrences in your mind where you put together things or think about something in a certain way, and then you have those insights to the epiphanies of life, I guess, whether it's art or anything else.
Sure.
Kind of
Well,
like when
yeah.
you learn how to drive and you are worried about getting lost because you don't know where anything is, but then in your mind you develop this mental map of places, and
Mhm.
then one day you connect that map with, oh, I can get to this place going from this direction as well. It was, I think it's more, you get that more before GPS
Yeah, I was about to
was
say, I think
so
that's
regular.
becoming a lost skill, but I do think it's a good analogy to what happens with art, right? You're collecting all these different skills, all these different places, and, pretty soon you don't have to have step-by-step directions on how to get to each place. That you can just draw on them as you need them, without that overt thinking.
Did you find when you were being trained for painting that you knew some of those things or realized some of those things on your own before you start getting
Um,
the
Yeah,
regular
I
training?
mean, some things, but I don't really believe that most things are learned on your own. I certainly don't believe in a self-taught artist. I think that's a bunch of BS. I do think that different people have access to different information and different levels of instruction, and that informs their ideas of what they believe are self-taught. But Pablo Picasso claimed to be self-taught, but his father was actually an atelier trained artist who studied at the École des Beaux-Arts, and Picasso himself did many of the atelier projects like bark plates and things like that. So it was in his marketing best interest to pretend that he didn't have any training, but that wasn't actually the truth.
Yeah, you got to make that attainable for other people. Maybe that's
Mhm,
what makes art a little palatable, is you think I could do that. And certainly I feel that way with like a garage band. Like the first time
mhm,
I heard Nirvana
mhm,
and then went back and listened to their album before Nevermind. And then
mhm,
you think, wow, I can do that. I have a
mhm.
guitar, I can make it sound like that. And then you can mimic it a little, but then it becomes, when you start looking at musical theory and seeing how the songs were set up, you start to realize these are people that have more training and experience in it than you first understand.
Sure, sure. I think that is the sign, like the hallmark sign of a highly skilled artwork, is that it looks or feels effortless to us when we experience it. And sometimes people come to me and they look at paintings that I've done, or the students in my class, and they'll be like, I could never do that, or I can't even draw a stick figure, or things like that. But the reality is that they just haven't had access to this particular knowledge. And especially when it comes to realistic drawing and painting skills, most people have not had access to atelier training, which is a collected body of knowledge on how to draw and paint realistically. I'm a licensed art teacher myself. I've worked in art education. I'm the former co-president of the Washington Art Education Association. And the prevailing philosophy in art education is that teaching skills will actually ruin creativity. And there are a lot of art teachers that are actually afraid to teach technical drawing and painting skills because of this belief that it might ruin creativity. And that's starting to change a little bit, but if you have a teacher who's afraid of ruining your creativity by teaching you what's known, you're unlikely to learn those particular skills, right? You might learn other skills that are valuable for different reasons. But if your job and your goal or your heart's desire is to draw and paint realistically, it's not that you don't have it. You learned how to read, you learned how to add. Those are all skills that are learnable and teachable, and so is drawing and painting. It's just that those skills have not largely been taught for the last 100 years.
It's the trade-off between being wild and being tame. I think I went through the same thing playing soccer as a kid, where I could kick the ball a long way,
Hmm.
and then when I learned how to kick, I couldn't kick it as far, but I could kick it more accurately.
Hmm.
And then I think through practice, you can get to the point where you were in the beginning. But I think there is the difference between wild and trained.
Yes. Well, it is very scary, especially when students come into my online class, because I teach drawing and painting online through the School of Atelier Arts. And, sometimes people come in and they really want to learn these skills, but they're so afraid to let go of what they've managed to scrap together before coming into the class, right? And it's inevitable that you're going to get a little bit worse before you really make a huge improvement. But that's such a scary stage for many students to be able to let go of some things that got them maybe 50% of the way there. But if they want to go 100% of the way, they need to go down to 25 and rebuild back to 100. And that's a really challenging thing to do. I tell my students all the time how proud I am of them and how brave they truly are, because creating art at high levels is a very brave undertaking. It's a very courageous undertaking, and you have to be willing to really dig deep, mentally, emotionally, sometimes physically, like sculptors, for example. It's actually a very physical profession. Um, and you really have to put it all on the line in order to learn anything at a high level, including art. And art is no different from being a world-class physicist or being, a premier athlete. If you learn anything at the highest levels, it's going to challenge and push you.
Do you think the advantage, or one of the advantages of learning from someone, is that maybe you could get there through experience, but you're not going to live long enough to collect all the experience
Oh,
of everyone else?
I can't tell you how many times I've had a student tell me that they invented a certain idea or technique in drawing
Mm.
that, took them 10 years to come up with, that I could have told them in 1 minute, right? And that's what atelier training is. This atelier training, it's been handed down from artist to artist for centuries, right? So it's not just my experience that you're getting in my online class. It's the people I trained with and the people that they trained with and the people that they trained with. And it's the collected body of knowledge and skill and technique in art. And you can have access to it all in one place called an atelier. And there's great ateliers out there. There's more online access to ateliers than have ever existed before. And it's possible for you. We teach people in the School of Atelier Arts online a few times a week, and we're providing this information. And it's amazing. The students are always like, "Oh my gosh, I didn't know that!" Like that. Every time I teach a class, it's like, "Oh, that never occurred to me. Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, that's what that means," or, "Oh, this is why I'm having a hard time mixing the color." It's not something that you have to struggle with. Like, that's part of the mythology that's been created, around modern art, is that, art has to be agonizing and, like, you either get it or you don't, you either have it or you don't. Like, what nonsense, right? Anybody can have it. It's just having access to the knowledge.
I think that transfers over to a lot of things too. Like with writing, I can see when, if you write enough, if you practice enough at writing, then you start to develop these things.
Sure,
And
but it's not just practicing, it's practicing with feedback from somebody that can help you get better. I can throw a basketball all day, every
mm,
day, and I'm not going to get significantly better without someone teaching me the techniques that are known to be useful.
yeah, it's a good point. It's the stumbling around until you find the light switch versus somebody just saying, there's the
Right,
light switch.
right, exactly. Like, why are we
Yeah.
torturing ourselves when this knowledge exists? It's out there and you can have it.
With swimming, I found that is, if I would consider it a good swimming session if I go out and then I have some sort of realization of a better way to propel through the water, or a better way to breathe, or whatever.
Mhm.
And then I'd go watch a video on it, and I haven't found anything yet that, to your point earlier, that somebody hasn't done a video on that I could have found and
Right,
realized it, but I just
right.
didn't know to look for it.
Well,
So
I mean, that's the advantage of working with a true expert in your field is that whatever it is that you say that you're working on, they can provide you the resources, knowledge, and experience either from their themselves or by pointing you in the direction that you want to go to.
it is reassuring though when you stumble across something on your own and then you find out that it has a name and
Yeah.
somebody else has done it before and you go, okay, this is the natural occurrence of things. Maybe there is
Mhm.
something to getting some more training.
Yeah, absolutely. That's not to say that the experts are always right, especially people that are at the high end, at whatever it is that they do. Sometimes they can be very dogmatic, like this is the one true way to learn the thing, and nobody else knows what they're talking about. And so it's about getting strong enough and skilled enough in whatever your pursuit is to start developing your own judgment about which instructors and which guidance you find valuable and is actually helping you.
Yeah. Knowing what works for you and then also what doesn't work or
Mhm.
doesn't work just for you is important for
Mhm.
sure. So, when do you remember the first type of artistic thing you did where you decided to do that on your own without prompting from someone else? Whether it was,
Ooh,
when we're
that's
kids,
good.
we draw a picture, but what's the thing that you first remember going, this is something I want to learn more about that I want to do more of?
I had always loved art from the earliest ages. I can't even remember a time that I didn't. I would say that I had several early influencing things that happened in my childhood, but one is that I actually was incredibly ill for a pretty extended time when I was about 5 years old. And I got to color a lot during that time, which is all I ever wanted to do. It was my favorite thing to do. And I remember even as I got better, it was time to go, back to school. And the teacher was like, oh, take it easy. You can, just color here and, you can join in the class when you want to. And I remember just extending how badly I felt because I could
Mm.
color, right? That I didn't want to do the other things. And so I would say that, even from that age, I knew what I loved to do more than anything else was art. Um, I had another experience where in second grade we went on a field trip to the art museum, and I was just blown away. I couldn't believe that those were real paintings, and I got to see real paintings and what they looked like. And I knew very much that I wanted to do that. Unfortunately for me, if I had wanted to be a great pianist, right, there's a lot of people that can teach you how to play piano at a high level and really well. But if you want to paint like a 17th century artist, right?
Mm.
At least at that time, there weren't people, even if, my parents signed me up for art classes all the time, but neither they nor I knew what it was that I was looking for. I didn't know that if I wanted to paint like Rembrandt, I needed atelier training until I was 25. I spent from, you know, second grade to 25 knowing that that's what I wanted to do, but not knowing how to do it. And at various points of time, almost giving up because, this idea that, oh, if you don't already know how to do it, you must not have it. Right. And so feeling like I just didn't have it, that I wasn't capable of learning those skills. And then at 25, discovering atelier training, it was like somebody told me that I could be an astronaut or whatever your childhood dream was, right? Like, okay, sign up for 4 years of training and you can go to the moon. That's what atelier training was to me. And so I left my teaching job at the time and I pursued atelier training for a number of years. And then I had started training other art teachers. My art teacher friends were like, Mandy, what are you doing? So I started giving workshops all over the country, training other art teachers in these skills so that we could incorporate them into public K-12 education. And then most recently, I've started my own online art school where I'll teach anybody. You don't have to be an art teacher. If you want to draw and paint realistically, you can sign up for this online class, the School of Atelier Arts, and we'll teach you what you want to know.
If you were, are there other schools of painting training that are different than that? Or is this just like the
I would,
paramount class of it? Or are there
yeah,
other like
I would
houses, if you will?
say, yeah, I mean, let's talk about music. There's classical music, there's garage bands, right?
Mm.
And if you know what it is that you're looking for, then you can get the training that you intend to get. So, there's abstract art, and some people love abstract art. But if you're looking for abstract art, an atelier is the wrong place for you. But if you want to draw and paint realistically, you can't go to an abstract art school. And most university programs today are abstract art schools. So if you want to draw and paint realistically, you're unlikely to find that at most universities. You need to go to these schools that operate outside of the university system. And they're called ateliers, Atelier. It's a French word. It just means studio. We use the French word because the Americans brought back the training from Paris in the late 1800s and early 1900s to the United States. And that's the term that has stuck.
Back when French was cool.
I would say that France
So
is still pretty cool, personally. The
yeah,
great
it's okay.
arts.
I mean, Napoleon's not walking around anymore, but it's all right. Um,
Luckily, yes.
so if you were going to go to RISD, you probably wouldn't find realistic art classes in the forefront.
So RISD is interesting. So RISD was actually founded by atelier trained artists, and then they kind of were more modern art influenced, but they've always kept like a couple people that had a strain of that atelier training. It's just it wasn't the main emphasis of the school for a period of time. So you can find occasionally people with a link to atelier training that are working in universities. That's possible, but most programs overall, like the overall training that you're getting there, emphasize modern ideas.
Is there a lot of cross, I want to say pollination, but that's just because that's fun to say, between like a realistic and a impressionist type painting? Are there
I mean,
people out there that are mixing those designs?
yeah, I mean, Impressionism is atelier training. Like the Impressionists all had atelier training. And then what happened is that these new colors were being invented that they incorporated into their practice outside of the more formal atelier system. But then they started their own kinds of ateliers. Like Monet had artists all the time at his, gardens, teaching what he had discovered about color to artists that came to train with him in kind of a informal atelier. So, we it's a very contemporary idea to be like this ism and that ism, impressionism, abstract expressionism, like that's a very modern way of thinking about art. But if you think about, okay, here's a set of skills and where do I see these skills being utilized? The same skill set is being utilized with like 90% overlap between impressionism and atelier training because impressionism is heavily derived on atelier training. But you don't see a Venn diagram or a big, overlap between, say, abstract expressionism and atelier training because abstract expressionism intentionally eschews technical skills, right?
Mm,
So
yeah. A
that's
lot of drama in the art world.
Oh, there is, and there's conspiracy, there's drama. I found it very interesting that the CIA was really heavily involved in basically a cultural Cold War. Especially during the 70s, and that they were one of the main pushers of abstract expressionism as a way to fight quote unquote communist realism, because working with atelier skills was something that the Russians emphasized. And so therefore the Americans did the most opposite thing of that they could do. So, even calling it communist realism, right? Like that's kind of
Yeah.
crazy. Like it was realism existed for a long time before the communists emphasized it. So
I wonder how much countries do just to be different from other places. It's got to be a lot because there's people like that. I mean, I'm probably like that, but
just like
there's,
being contrarian. Well,
yeah.
I mean, they really
You got
saw
to
it
fight the
as
power.
yeah, well, they saw it, as a front in a war. I mean, the CIA at the time, through their front, the Congress for Cultural Freedom, they were funding music, arts, plays. They were basically trying to win the hearts and minds of Europeans to keep, communism from spreading, right? Especially during Reconstruction after World War II. So, it's interesting how and when political powers view art as a weapon, as a tool, as a diplomatic coercion, as just its own worth to be pursued, in its own right. Art means many different things to many different people and can be used in very different ways.
Were there communists out there plotting to take over the world with realism?
Well,
Or they think about that?
so in the Russian school, 20th century Russian realism, in America we call it communist realism, but
Mm.
Russian realism. Um, but at the time, Russia had state-sponsored artists, and of course, with state sponsorship came certain restrictions, but also certain benefits. So one of the benefits was that you didn't pay for your paint, right? You were officially, an employed person with the government as a painter. But there's a great story. Vern Swanson, he's the former director of this museum in Utah. I want to say it's the Spring. I can never remember if it's Springfield or Springville Museum in Utah. It's this tiny museum, but he specialized in Russian realism of the 20th century. And the collection's insane. If you want to see Russian realism, go to this museum. And he told me this story. He would go over there collecting stuff, come back. But he told me a story about how, because the Russians paid for paint, that and also that there was like a housing paint shortage during the time, that one of the artists took the most expensive pigment, this cadmium red, and painted his whole house with the government supplied cadmium red, because he could get the cadmium red for free and he couldn't get paint for his house, and kind of,
Wow.
as a as a subversive act, he painted his house
Had to
red.
be red too, just for the
Mhm.
communist part of it. Hmm.
Perhaps. Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't think about the symbolism of red other than that it was the most expensive. But the cool thing is that you can see in these artworks that they weren't afraid to use expensive pigments, and they developed a style of painting with really thick paint that you would never see outside of those circumstances, because artists of course are famous for not having a lot of money, right? So it created some techniques and some aesthetics within those constraints that were truly unique to the Russians. And, you can tell it's a Russian 20th century painting if there's a streak of cadmium red on it somewhere that's like a half an inch thick.
Wow. So that does say that the state-sponsored artist was maybe going to make more impression on the world because of that, like because they had the free crayons.
Yeah, well, and I mean, there were restrictions, right? Like if you're working for the government, you may not be making art that's critical of the government, and the government, of
Right.
course,
Right.
has an agenda. But, we like to point and be like, Russian realism, communist realism, they had an agenda. Their government was controlling their art. Well, at the same time, our government was sponsoring abstract realism exhibitions all throughout Europe, right? So what's the difference, really? At least the Russians knew their art was being manipulated by the government, whereas the Americans were pretending that we were doing
Humans like to meddle.
it.
Goodness.
Well, it's
Wow. I wonder.
power, control. I mean, people think, "Oh, it's just a painting. Look at the painting behind me. Oh, it's just a painting." But it's not. Art is considered a weapon in many cultures and has been weaponized and used for varying purposes throughout all of human history.
Yeah, you certainly can use it for like establishing some sort of pride in your country. Like whether
Sure.
you say we're going to paint this large eagle,
Mhm.
it's going to have a round head or it's going to have a straight head, difference
Right.
between America and Nazis. That
Mhm.
easy to see that difference. And
Well, I
then,
see an interest even with these AI generation, right? For the first time, people with no training are able to create realistic imagery based on any idea they plug into the machine, right? And we see this explosion of interest of people who have been creators the whole time who just didn't feel like they could do it on their own, right? But it's their ideas being brought to life, through these merging of images through these AI engines, and we see them being used for all sorts of political purposes, and we can see them using for benevolent and terrible purposes as well. So it's not really different. Imagery is the most effective form of communication. A picture can communicate to anybody no matter what language they speak, and it's often used for many purposes.
it's a good point. Have you used any computer generated or
I despise it
AI or
personally.
oh, really? You don't
So
think
for
there's something to be taught by it? Like,
um
if you can put
I
all your classical training in there and then ask it questions like, "What should this curvature be, and what color should it be, and how should it be blended, hue, and all this?"
Sure. Well, I think for me, painting is about visual meditation and about careful observation. And I don't want to export that to a machine. The reason I paint is for that experience and for that understanding of the visual things around me. And so for me personally, it defeats a bit of the purpose of why I chose to paint. Now, um, throughout time, new technologies have always been perceived as a threat or a boon to artists, right? Like when photography came out, it was going to be the end of painting, but obviously painting survived, right? So I'm not against the existence of the technology. I just think that you know, for example, if you have a mug, I have this mug in front of me, right? And you're
Mhm.
looking at it, not through the screen, but me. I actually see the whole mug in 3D. And we have two eyes, which means we're seeing things three-dimensionally, right? And it's a three-dimensional object. And this is massive amounts of visual information that is going to our brain, right? But what you're seeing is a camera's compression of all that information from 3 dimensions to 2 dimensions. And so, what choices has that technology made that you weren't even aware of about what this cup actually is, right? And what artists can do is they can take the elements that they find most fitting or most enjoyable or most purposeful for their artworks and eliminate the other information, and be purposeful and decisive about what's included and what's not, whereas a machine is doing that for you. So, my dislike of the machine learning or even using photography and painting from photographs is that a machine has already um, you know filtered out 90% of the visual information and spit it out in the same way every time for you to consume.
Doesn't that make the artist and the machine kind of the same? Because the machine's making decisions and the artist is making decisions?
Sure, I would agree that they're both making decisions, but I think that there's something this is going to sound really basic, but there's something very human about a human making choices. And also, when I draw or paint something, it's because I experienced a feeling or idea that I want to convey to the viewers of my canvas. And my job as I paint it is to make sure that you get the same feeling or idea that I did. That's the visual communication part. Whereas a camera has a different agenda. They're trying to put the most pixels per inch because that's how we have programmed this technology to be the most honest, quote unquote. But a photograph is no more honest than an abstract painting as far as a portrait of somebody, right? It's just an abstraction, just done differently.
Yeah, so the machine made the decision based on how it was programmed to do it
Hmm. Hmm.
because theoretically more than one person put in the prompts for it. So you're
Sure.
getting however many people involved and however a video works
Yeah. Well, a
versus the
common
artist's
right.
perspective of it.
A common problem that we face in painting is that our lightest color, white, is actually darker than the lights that our eyes can see. In fact, this light behind me and the light coming through your screen is brighter than white pigment we have. If you hold up a piece of white, quote unquote, paper next to a light, it looks gray, it looks dark, right? That's how much darker our whitest white is compared to what our eyes can actually observe. So then the artist has to make a decision. If you want to make it the lightest you can, you use that white paint, right? But this light also is very yellow. And if I add yellow to my white paint, yellow is darker than white, and yellow is going to darken the white and it's going to get
Mhm.
further away from the value. So I have to make a choice. Do I want to get the value by using just my pure white, the lightest light that I have? Or do I want to show the color by adding yellow, even though it's going to take me even further away in the value? So, you know, artists and classically trained painters, we're grappling with these visual problem solving situations all the time. And, what we want to make sure that we're doing is if I want you to feel a warm summer's day, I'm going to pick that yellow and sacrifice the white. But if I want you to feel like blinding light in my painting, I'm going to pick the white because it's lighter in value. But those choices will mean different things and describe different ideas to the viewers.
Do you ever think about what if the color that you call a certain color, other people think is a different color? Like, how do we all
Oh, yes.
see things the exact same way
Uh,
or
so this
not?
is actually very contentious in the atelier world, and depending on
Oh,
who you ask, people are going to give you different answers. I believe that color can be taught very specifically and that we all see the same colors. It's just that some of us have developed our color sense at a higher and more refined level than other people do. But I think that you can see with training the same color that I am seeing. That being said, there are some physical differences that do come into play, particularly between men and women, because red green color blindness is very common in men. And so I can't teach you to see a color that you don't have a cone for receiving that color into your eye. But, sometimes people come to me like, Mandy, I've always wanted to learn how to paint, but I'm red green color blind. And, is it hopeless for me? I'm like, absolutely not. Like, you can paint beautiful paintings with an emphasis on value over color. And in fact, there's several paintings like Eugene Carrier comes to mind that I'm pretty convinced are red green color blind, that make beautiful paintings. Um, so but there are systems, artists throughout history have tried to create systems. A really famous one is called the Munsell color system. It's a way of organizing color, with one way to describe the value, one way to describe the chroma, and one way to describe the hue, and that gets people generally in the same ballpark talking about colors. But again, we still have this problem with being able to observe colors that are different than what we have pigment for. The Munsell system is premeditated on these color swatches, right? So it only contains the pigments that we can create, not all of the colors that we can see. So, color is probably the most fascinating problem in all of atelier training to kind of sort and evaluate and organize and try to teach even.
is there a designation of like a color sommelier in the art world?
Um, it's interesting to me that occasionally, not even occasionally, all the time, you come across real world color problems. So something that's coming to mind is a few years ago, there was this gray paint that people were going crazy for, and it was called Elephant's Breath. Okay.
Mhm.
And it was like a grayish paint, but depending on the time of day, it would look a little bit purple or a little bit green or a little bit, it felt like it was moving or changing in some capacity. And people just loved this color. And of course, they were charging like, I don't know, like $100 a gallon or something. Don't quote me on that, but it was a very expensive paint, and people kept trying to mimic it, but were having difficulty coming up with the same color, even when they took the color swatch to the paint mixing place and try to get it. But the reason that it was such an interesting color is because it was dealing with what we call in the painting world, in the atelier world, a chromatic neutral, which that seems like counterintuitive, right? Like, because chroma is the opposite of neutral. A really chromatic color, like a chromatic red, is like a stop sign red. A more neutral red is like a brick red, right? But
Chroma is like intensity?
yeah, intensity of
Okay.
color. So, but there's something called chromatic neutrals, which is basically if you take a gray, like a true neutral, it looks like a gray and it doesn't look like a green gray or blue gray or yellow gray or anything. But it takes a lot of subtlety and a fair amount of training of your eye to control your grays in a sense, in this case, that it looks just a little bit purple, right? So, what happens is that a chromatic neutral is made up of red, yellow, and blue they're not equal amounts, but when they are put together, it creates a true no color. So it has every color in it, right? Red, yellow, and blue. It's because yellow and blue make green, and yellow and red make orange. So it has every color in it. So when you tilt it just a little bit to purple, it'll read purple at first, but if you start looking for the green, you'll be able to see the green because there's yellow and blue in it. And if you start looking for the orange, you'll be able to see the orange. And that's what was happening with this elephant's breath paint, is that it was a chromatic neutral. But most paint colors that you get at the store, they are not neutralized hardly at all. Like, they change values, but they're not very subtle paint colors. They're not very sophisticated paint colors, in my opinion,
Mm.
because we've lost that skill, right? If we had classically trained painters making the color swatches, we'd have much more subtle colors. And whether by accident or intention, elephant's breath was a more sophisticated color using this concept of a chromatic neutral.
You should make a color match machine and market it to Lowe's and Home Depot, and the like. That is the sophisticated color.
Well, the true problem is that because okay, I paint my walls a lot. I'm an artist, right? And trying to get a color that you actually want out of these places is really difficult because I know that I want a color to be more chromatic or more neutral, but the way they have it, it's all by numbers and then it injects a certain amount of pigment and then they shake it up, right? And they're like, "Well, what color do we need to add?" And I'll be like, "Well, how strong is your yellow pigment? How strong is your red pigment?" Like I need to know these things,
I've been
to be
behind
able to
somebody
tell
like you in
you.
line before.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
yes. So, what I've started doing is getting the pigments in the small containers and then mixing them myself in different increments and then be like, okay, it's 2 parts of this paint to 1 part of this paint to 1 part of this paint. And then I can have them take all those numbers, double this one, take a single of this one and this one, and then come up with the combination of the color that I actually want. But if they had a system that allowed you to neutralize by 0 to 100 using a chromatic neutral, that would be amazing. But so far, that does not exist.
This was the plan of the communists to bog us down in sophisticated color to where we couldn't do anything else, and then the government just comes in and says, "We're here to rescue
Yes.
you. Here's
Well,
some
I
free
mean,
crayons."
I just thank goodness we're finally escaping the grayish era of, like, the 2010s and oh my god, like, what a soul-sucking time to be alive when everything got painted white and gray and just
I got a lot of blue-gray going on here,
okay,
so
well, at least blue-gray is not, like, gray-gray, right?
it's not
If you
elephant's
need
breath,
some
so
elephant's breath, yeah.
yeah. This is more of a tiger dream. That's what it is.
Ooh,
Okay, yeah.
ooh, tiger dream.
Yeah, it's when a tiger closes his or her eyes, this
Mhm.
is what they see.
Oh.
Um, have you thought about or ever talked with some people that were blind and now can see, were always blind, or were used to be able to see and now blind? Have you talked to those people
Um
about painting and color?
I have not personally talked to any of those people. I do obsessively research color with my work, and I have come across anecdotes, written by people that couldn't see and then could see. And the consistent message that I found in the anecdotes I've been able to collect is that they, sorry, I think I'm messing this up. I think it was actually hearing deprived people that could
Mm,
hear saying that they were surprised color didn't have a sound. That's what the
mm.
anecdote was.
Well, it's on that spectrum. I mean, I
Yeah,
think color and sound are connected allegedly in
sure,
wavelengths. So
sure.
it's it's when you get hit hard and then you see stars, that has to
Yeah,
have
yeah.
something to do with sound and color.
Sure, sure, and pain.
It's when I had laser vision correction in 2000, 2000, yeah, 2000. And it was the kind where they did the corneal flap. And they
Mm,
said, all right, when we cut the cornea and create this flap, you're going to be blind while
mhm.
we do that. And they're doing one eye at a time.
Oh my
And
gosh, how
was
scary.
not what it wasn't what yeah, it was. I mean, I didn't take the Valium, but then
Uh,
when they started, like they
Rookie
put the thing in your
mistake.
eye, they put that thing in your eye and open your eye up. I was
Uh-huh.
like, ah, I should have had the Valium.
Yeah, yeah.
But you just try to be cool, be cool.
Yeah, yeah.
And I thought when they did that and they said you're going to be blind, that everything would be dark. It
Uh-huh.
would be like blindfold in a dark room.
Mhm.
And it was more like the Matrix load program where
Oh,
everything
interesting.
is white. It's
Oh.
it's a it's not so I don't remember thinking that hurts my eyes.
Mhm.
I can't squint or anything. I just remember
Mhm.
thinking this is not what I thought it would be like. And
Right.
then when I've talked to blind people, it's different when you talk to people that used to be able to see and now can't, that have never been able to see and that
Mhm.
couldn't see and now can see. It's
Mhm.
different conversations with each of them.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because they say they have trouble sleeping and keeping track of time. And
Oh,
I
that makes sense.
understand that because it's like you're
Mhm.
always in a room with the lights on. You're in a white
Right.
room with the lights on all the time.
That's
So
fascinating.
it terrified me when they said that. But
Yeah.
and then just putting that together with the corneal flap thing, and
Mhm.
it's something to think about with how do you
Well,
explain a painting to someone that can't see a painting?
right. Well, my curiosity is what color of white are they seeing? Because white is actually not a color, it's just a really, really light value. So it's a really light
See.
yellow,
Yeah.
green, blue, whatever. So my instinct is to try to figure out, well, what color of white are they seeing?
Yeah. It's there was a time I haven't had the art training you have. It's high school art training. And I've been reading some things. And then when you consider the color black and white, sometimes you read things and it says black is the absence of all color. And then sometimes it says it's the presence of all color. And then it's the same thing for white, that it's
Yeah.
the presence of all color or it's the opposite. And when I think about it some more, I'll send you an email
Okay.
about
Well, it
where
depends if you're
what it
talking
made
about
sense when I heard about it.
yeah, it depends if you're talking about light, like because or if you're talking about pigment because they're different. But as far as pigment goes, which is where my area of expertise is, there's no such thing as black either. Black is just a really dark value, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, or purple, right? That's why
Right.
when you have a black marker that gets wet, you wrote something with a black marker and it gets wet.
Mm.
That's why it runs blue or red or sometimes purple or blue and
Mhm.
red. The pigment separates because it's just a really concentrated dark value of that pigment. There's no such thing as black. There's no such thing as white when we're talking about painting, only really light and really dark red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple.
What is the what is when you have all the colors together? What is that?
Well, it depends on what proportion that you've put those colors together, but most likely it's going to be a neutral that leans towards one direction, like an orangey neutral or blue neutral or something, depending on. So when you're painting, so you can't just take equal piles of every color and put it together because some pigments are stronger than other pigments. Some pigments are ground at a finer level than other pigments. They'll interact with different pigments in a different way. So you can't depend on just taking equal amounts of pigments and putting them together. What you need to figure out is visually, like if you want to make orange and you want the orange to be halfway between the yellow you're using and the red that you're using, you're going to have to use a lot more yellow than the red because the red's a stronger pigment than the yellow, right? But in order to get visually halfway between them, you can't take equal amounts. You have to take like 3 parts yellow to 1 part red to get the halfway color.
Hmm. I don't have the bandwidth for this conversation. I'm
Sorry,
gonna have to
we're
read a
getting
book
very
about.
nerdy.
Yeah,
Yeah, sorry, I
I
can geek
feel
out
like
on
I'm walking
color all
through
day
a
long.
museum and somebody's like, "Yes, this is
Well,
obviously communist. You can tell
well,
by the red stripes."
I have a free color class on my website at schoolofatelierarts.com. It's right on the front page there. So if you do wake up in the middle of the night just pining to know more about color, you can take that free class.
What's the best way for people to follow your work and to be able to sign up for the training that you do?
So you can see my artwork at Mandy Fine Artist on Instagram and the School of Atelier Arts. Again, that's ATELIER. That's how atelier is spelled. If you go to the www.schoolofatelierarts.com, you can find information about our free color class. You can sign up for our online painting boot camp, which is our more serious study training for people. And we also have a variety of articles and other information. We can help you set up a studio, in the classical painting way, things like that. So I hope you'll check it out and consider joining us in our online class.
I have all those links in the show notes too, so people can go there and see them. Kind of close this out because I know you have a time restraint. What is your studio, your personal studio where you do your work? How do you have that set up? Do you
Oh,
have considerations for it when you're thinking about it?
Oh, absolutely. North facing
Okay.
light, for sure.
Mm.
And, I used to have a studio outside of my home, but I found that I'm most productive when I can be a little bit social and like homey and cozy. I felt that having a studio outside of my house was too cold and I don't know, far away or distant. And so I've actually found that I'm most productive when my studio is in my home with north facing lights and keeping it simple. I used to have like 100 canvases ready to go and, all the tools and all the things. But I found that as I simplified my setup, that I could focus more on painting and become less distracted by everything else. So I would argue for the simplest setup that will get you what you need to get done, and north facing light.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for your time. It's very interesting. Perhaps we talk again in the future about some other topics after I become versed with color, chroma, and such.
Well, thank you
But
so much for having me. I appreciated our conversation today.
yeah. All right. I'll talk to you on the other side of this musical exit.